If you're currently planning a big lap road trip around Australia and you're watching the fuel price smash through the $2 a litre mark and still climbing, it's got to be causing you some heartburn. But what impact is this going to have on your trip budget? What can you do to spend less on fuel on your trip? And what's the outlook for fuel prices going forward? These are the questions I'm going to answer in this episode of Ask Steve. G'day guys, thanks for joining me. Now, we've enjoyed pretty stable fuel prices for the last 15 years or so, generally around the $1.30 to $1.50 mark. The exception being in 2008 when prices spiked up around the sort of $1.60 mark. So it's disappointing to see prices spiking up over $2 now, especially if you're planning a big lap and you're going to go and use a fair amount of fuel in the next year or two. As if the last couple of years of border closures and lockdowns haven't been enough, now we've got high prices of fuel to deal with and everything else for that matter. Inflation seems to be driving the price of everything up at the moment. So what's causing this spike in fuel prices? Well, the simple answer would be, it's the war in Ukraine, the supply of oil coming out of Russia. But the reality is prices were spiking a long time before that happened. In fact, in October last year, we were already starting to see it climb. And by early February, mid-February, it was already at record new highs. The main driver for increasing fuel prices is actually increasing demand as the world sort of slowly crawls its way out of lockdowns and working from home and all that sort of thing. People are getting out more, people are traveling more, people are using more oil, and that's causing a higher demand, and that's driving prices up. This article here in Australian Financial Review says recovering oil demand amid a relaxing of COVID-19 restrictions around the world also contributed to the hike in February prices. Obviously, the Ukraine war situation is a factor as well. A lot of oil comes out of Russia to Europe and America and other parts of the world, and so that's causing supply issues. At this point, I don't think they've stopped pumping it out of Russia, but I know the rest of the world is pretty much scrambling for new sources of oil, because they don't want to have that dependence on Russia, because really who knows at this stage where this war's going to go. So I thought it'd be worth actually taking a look at how the increasing petrol price and diesel price would impact your budget if you're planning a big lap right now. And to do that, let's get out the big lap budget spreadsheet. So this is our big lap budget spreadsheet, and it's a free spreadsheet you can download off our website, and I'll leave a link underneath this video here so you can grab a copy. If you're planning a big lap, it's a great place to start. It's quite simple. Basically just takes a whole bunch of variables which are relative to your trip. How long you plan to travel for, how many nights a month you can stay in caravan parks and free camping and things like that. It's got a fuel cost calculator, which is what we're going to use for this video right now. It's got a food cost calculator, all of your general overheads and expenses, takes into account income that you're earning along the way, how much cash you've got, and it basically boils down to how much money you're going to need each month on your trip on average. All right, so let's just jump over to the fuel cost calculator, because that's the bit we're interested in for this video. Now you can see the default numbers I've got in here. These are the ones in yellow. I've got 17, which is roughly what our Land Cruiser averages on fuel consumption on a big road trip when it's fully loaded and towing a camper trailer. Current city price of fuel, that's what it was when I updated the spreadsheet last, which is a couple of years ago. Now, if we look at what it was last year, because let's compare last year to this year, $1.43 was the average diesel price across Australia last year. So let's put $1.43 in there as our starting point. Now we've got a 25% remote area fuel loading. So basically it just adds 25% to whatever the city price is here, because you will spend a fair amount of your trip in outback and remoter regions where the fuel's going to be higher anyway. And we've got a total trip distance of 35,000 kilometres. Now obviously if you're going to plan to do more or less than that, then you can change that, but that's a pretty good average for most people who do a sort of a complete lap right around the country and do most of these sort of side trips along the way. So you can see that based on a 12-month trip, because we've got 12 months up here, we're looking at approximately $886 a month for fuel. What difference would it make at $2.20? Because that's sort of roughly the current price of fuel. $1,364, so that's a pretty dramatic difference, isn't it? So let's have a look at the difference there. 1,364 minus 886, $478 difference, which over the 12 months of the trip, $5,700. So obviously a fairly big difference in expenditure from one year to the next, just in extra price of fuel. So over $5,000 is a pretty big hit to the bottom line when you're planning a trip like this, and you'd have to be thinking about ways that you can, compensate for that. How can you reduce that? How can you basically, limit the impact on your bottom line? So I've come up with a few ideas of how you can potentially reduce your fuel bill, and also ways you can save in other areas so that you can compensate for the extra that you will inevitably need to spend on fuel. The first one is to just travel lighter. I think as a general philosophy, traveling light is always the right way to go, and that comes from the experience of having been the opposite of that. We started our big lap being way overloaded. I knew we had too much stuff. The car's so heavy and the tow bar's so low that we can't get the trailer down to meet it.
What about if we put some blocks coming down?
We had sort of stuff everywhere we could possibly put stuff, and soon regretted it, and spent sort of the first months of our trip, gradually offloading and lightening up the load, and it just got easier and easier and easier as we went. But the general philosophy, take as little as you can get away with. Just think lighter, lighter, lighter all the time, because every kilo you've got on board, you've got to carry all the way with you. It's more time packing, it's more time unpacking, it's more things to go wrong, it's more load on your vehicle, and in this case, it's more fuel that you're going to burn. Now, the second thing to do is look at the economy of your vehicle. Now, our old 80 series Land Cruiser is a relatively affordable four-wheel drive, and it's a good practical vehicle for a trip like this, and I'd certainly recommend it. But it's not super economical. The diesel turbo version that we've got is the most sort of economical of the 80 series you can get. I mean, a petrol version is just way worse. You're talking about sort of 24, 25 litres per 100 kilometres, which is just a crippling amount of fuel to use. But these days, four-cylinder turbo diesel vehicles are way, way, way more economical than that. I know that, when they advertise them new, they quote numbers in the 8 or 9 litres per 100 kilometres, which is probably not realistic for a big lap trip, because you're going to be carrying a lot of load. You're going to be driving down, rough roads and things like that. But even if you're in the 10, 11, 12 litres per 100 kilometres, that's a whole lot better than 17 or 18 that you're going to be getting from an old sort of gas guzzler like the old 80 series, and certainly a lot better than an older petrol vehicle. So that's something to look at. The likes of the Navara, the D-Max, the Hilux, the Triton. These are all sort of, the Ranger. These are all vehicles that have a good, economical, powerful four-cylinder turbo diesel, and certainly the sort of things you probably want to be looking at if you're looking to really minimise your fuel bill for the trip. The third idea is to look at streamlining your rig. A lot of people don't really give it a lot of consideration, but the more that you're pushing wind down the road in front of you, the more fuel you're going to burn, the harder the engine's going to work, and the more fuel you're going to burn. So look at what you've got on your roof rack. Look at how you can streamline that. Do you really want a big, tall caravan behind a low four-wheel drive that's just like this wall of caravan coming along behind you? Really have a look at how you can really streamline that rig, because it really could make quite a big difference. And a couple of litres per 100 kilometres difference will add up to a lot of money on a trip right around Australia. Look at how you can put a wind foil on the roof rack and things like that. After our big lap, I had a canvas cover made for our roof rack, so that it sort of sits over the top and down the sides. It's not a bag, it's sort of more like a lid. It's like a tonneau cover that goes on a ute. I prefer to use that rather than a bag, which is sealed. The idea is it's like a lid that goes over the roof rack instead of being in a bag. So I can roll it to the front, and then I can just roll it down and just use the elastic straps to hold it in place. And that was so that I could sort of throw everything up on the roof rack and then just roll the cover over the top and sort of strap it down the sides, and it made for a nice smooth top to the roof rack, and really streamlined the airflow across the top. And I actually noticed that in the fuel consumption after I started using that on long trips. So things like that make a difference. It's probably worth getting it set up right from the start, and then you'll sort of reap the rewards all the way around. Now, the fourth idea isn't specifically about saving fuel, but it's about saving money that you can then spend on fuel, and that is to become as self-sufficient as you possibly can be. If you're dependent on staying in caravan parks every night, well, then you're going to have to pay for that every night. But if you can free camp at every opportunity you get, because you've got a fully self-sufficient rig, well, you can save a lot of money, and you can certainly save a lot more on accommodation than the extra you'll spend on fuel because of these, fuel price spikes. So when you're looking at your rig, whether it's your caravan or your camper trailer or whatever setup you're going for, look at how can we be completely self-sufficient? How can we pull into a roadside stop or a state forest or a national park or something that's free or very, very cheap as an overnight stop? And how can we basically be self-sufficient there? So that if you can take 1 or 2 nights a week of caravan parks and turn them into free camps or very cheap national park camps, then that's going to save you significant money. If you save $50 a week, that's $2,500 a year. There's half of your extra fuel recovered just in savings on accommodation. Now, the fifth idea is to actually carry more fuel. Now, I know earlier on I said about reducing the weight of your whole setup and traveling light, but I think with fuel, that's actually a false economy. I think you're actually better to carry more fuel or have the capacity to carry more fuel. You don't necessarily have to be carrying full tanks all the time. It's a bit of an option you can use as and when you need it. But having the option to be able to fill up and travel a long distance between fuel stops means that you can reduce your dependence on those very remote and very expensive fuel stops. If you can basically reduce your dependence, I'm not saying you won't need to buy fuel there at all, but if you don't need to fill up there, you can just top up, add 100 litres instead of 200. Well, that might make the difference. That could save you quite a lot of money on the whole trip overall. So ways you can do that is with a long-range tank. In our 80 Series Land Cruiser, we've got the main tank's a 90-litre tank, which is the one that came with it. And we've replaced the back tank, which was originally a 45-litre tank, with a 170-litre tank, and it's a long-ranger tank. So now we've got 260 litres of fuel on board, which gives us a comfortable range of around 1,300 kilometres or an absolute stretch of about 1,500 kilometres. And that really gives us options. We can drive the entire length of the Tanami Road from sort of the Kimberley down into Central Australia without needing to get fuel on the way. Now, we've done that a couple of times, and we do top up with fuel along the way, but we don't need to buy a lot. We're just sort of buying a little bit of reserve, just adding a bit. And also, we do like to support those remote fuel stops. Want to give them something, but we don't necessarily want to be draining their tanks to fill up ours. Now, the sixth idea is to actually plan your fuel purchases in advance. And the way you do that is using an app like FuelMap. It's a crowdsourced app where people like us, when we buy fuel, we can put in what price we paid for it. And so the app is always showing you the most recent price that someone's added to the app. And depending on where you are, they can be as recent as today or yesterday or the day before. But they give you a general sense of what the price of fuel is in the areas that you're traveling to. And so with that information, you can basically say, okay, well, gee, fuel down at that stop is going to be really expensive, but I can carry enough to get past that and go to the next fuel stop where it's 20 cents a litre cheaper. And, that's going to save me $50 on a fill up or something like that. So using the app, you can plan your fuel purchases and make sort of smart decisions about where you're going to buy fuel. And by having extra fuel capacity on board, whether that's with a long range tank or with jerry cans or a combination of all of those things, you can then you can be a bit more savvy about where you buy fuel instead of just having one sort of small tank and just having to buy fuel every single place you come to along the way. So hopefully that's going to help you claw back some of that extra money that you're going to end up having to spend on fuel. But I wanted to get a sense of whether or not prices are going to stay high up in that $2 something range, or whether we can expect them to fall back down again into the sort of the high $1 or even better than that. I've been scanning the internet looking for news articles and experts that can give me some sort of an opinion, and to be honest, there really isn't much out there. There's lots of talk about why the fuel price has gone up and what's happening here and what's happening there, but not many pundits are prepared to sort of put their reputation on the line, say whether it's going to keep going up or whether it's going to come down, or what's going to happen. Anyway, I reached out to my uncle, who's actually worked in the oil drilling industry his whole life, and certainly has his finger on the pulse of the oil industry, and asked him, I said, Mel, what's your opinion on this? Do you think we can expect fuel prices to come back down again? And he came up with a pretty solid response. So I'm just going to read you that, and we'll go from there. And he said, well, I would think the prices will come down for sure. Saudi has agreed to increase oil production. The US is drilling again in earnest, and there'll be some result in Ukraine one way or another. I think the world has got a good plan in place to compensate for the lack of Russian oil in the marketplace. If you believe the latest federal poll that Labor will win the next election, then I think it would be safe to say there'll be some form of reduction in the fuel price excise. Definitely not 44 cents, but 20 cents probably. I think fuel will land around $1.70 to $1.80 in the near term and around May sometime. So that's pretty optimistic. I actually noticed today there was an article saying that the Liberal government's also signalling a potential drop in the fuel excise it's a pre-election and an upcoming budget kind of move. I mean, if you take that for what it's worth, it looks like it might come back down again. Look, at the end of the day, we can't control the price of fuel. All we can really do is just try and use as little of it as we can possibly get away with. But you don't want to let this derail your big lap plans. You know, there's always going to be roadblocks. There's always going to be hurdles. There's going to be something you're going to have to overcome. And really, it's just about chipping away at those roadblocks and getting to that start line one way or another. Now, if you don't already have a copy of our Big Lappers guidebook and you're planning your big lap, then you definitely want to get your hands on one. You can download the ebook version for free from our website, and there's a link down below this video, and you can also order a printed version like this one, and it's you know, all 300 pages of it. Heaps and heaps and heaps of info there that's going to help you to plan your big lap. Take you pretty much step by step right through the whole process from having the idea in the first place to sort of day one of your trip and beyond. So thanks for joining me, guys, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button just to give the video a bit of a boost, and I will see you in the next video very soon.